Heidi. We're here at Missoula Community Access Television, taping to explore metaphysical and holistic concepts. Today we have a wonderful guest with us. His name is Philip Zemke, and thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
And if people aren't familiar with you, I wanted to ask you what you do in the community.
At present, I'm actually in Bozeman more than I
Okay.
am in Missoula.
Mm-hmm.
For 4 years, I've been the spiritual leader at the Unity Church in Bozeman. After spending 12 years working with the Unity Church here in Missoula, I was called there. They had a need, and so I filled the need. And slowly but surely, we're moving into full ordination there.
So do you call yourself a pastor or minister?
Many years ago, I worked with a group called the Fellowship of the Holy Grail, which works in first century Christian healing methods. And this was in Santa Cruz, California.
Okay.
And I was ordained through them. And so although I don't use a title, there are days when I recognize myself as a teacher, and I say that. I am a teacher today. But I think more and more what I'm recognizing is that I'm simply a storyteller, and that I've been doing this all my life. And since I was a little child, well, I'll tell you a little story.
Oh, good.
When I was a little child in Michigan, and I used to travel home from school, I had to cross the busy part of this small rural community. And what I learned later was that the business people used to all come to the windows and stand and watch me go by, because I would be dancing or play acting and telling stories. And they all came to watch the mythical event in town, which was that Philip the Storyteller was coming on by. And
Wow.
since then, I've worked in the theater for years. I worked as a sculptor and artist, always working narratively, creating art that had story in it. I've been a playwright. I've been an actor and a director, a puppeteer, and I work professionally as a storyteller also.
Well, those must be exciting, what do they call it? Sermons to go to in Bozeman.
Yes, I do have a good time, because it is a story, and it's educational. It does have entertainment value, but it also is mythical. And it's often said, well, today you were in the zone, which means to me that I reach that mythical place where the language is totally universal, where Spirit is speaking through me, and that everyone comes with me into that realm. And we know when that occurs.
And how did you bring in the spiritual aspect? What called you? I mean, you said call, and I immediately wanted to say you were called to Bozeman. Was that a call from on high, or was that a call on the phone? Or
Well, sometimes the on high calls you on the phone.
That's fun.
It is. It is. What had occurred was that I had a 6-year-old son here in Missoula. His mom and I had agreed that even though we weren't in relationship any longer, that we would do everything we could to stay in the same place, so that my child would have that continuum of education, continuum of response with both parents. And I had even been turning down teaching jobs in Evergreen College and Antioch College on the West Coast, and I'd go over and I'd try to do Seattle for a while, and I'm not a city boy, and so I'd come back and I'd tell my son, I'd say, now if I take one of these jobs, I'll come and spend 3 days of weekend with you once a month, which is a pretty large promise to make to a child. And then I came to the realization that I could not do that, and that I owed more to my child than I did to anything else. So I actually founded an institute called the Cultural Resource Institute that now has taken me around the world, which is another thing that I do, which is I work in the art therapies. But at this point, I said, son, I'm here for you. I'm in Missoula. And then his mom married a man from Bozeman and moved to Bozeman and took my child away. And like Rumpelstiltskin, I was standing at my house, stomping on the back deck, ready to put my leg through the floor, so angry and feeling betrayed by the universe. And I reached a point where I recognized that either I was going to create an angry situation that was not going to serve my child or anybody else, or I could surrender to a mystery that was larger than I was, and it was totally large, and ask it, what do you want me to do? And what happened was it said, just go as often as you can. So at the time, I wasn't driving. I stopped driving for 12 years. I took a hiatus. And so I would ride the bus over to Bozeman, and I would spend time with my son. And I would stay at the house of a friend, and she was a member of the Unity Church. And one day she said, we need speakers. Would you come and speak? And the next thing you know, 3 months later, I'm the spiritual leader of that church. So where does the call come from? Well, it came through my child
Yeah.
at that time. And I had asked myself the question about becoming a unity minister years before and never knew how to get the answer. I didn't know the answer. And so being called is very, very special. I was called as a child. I was called when I was in puberty by what were called fevers of unknown origin that would put me in a coma for days at a time, and I would go traveling, and I would be instructed, and I would be sent back. And visions that I was having were actually visionary, spirit coming into manifestation, right at that edge of form, and would come and say, I want you to do these things. And I just thought I was having hallucinations. Actually, it turned out that only when I was in my 20s did I realize that I'd been having very interesting experiences as a child. At one point, because my household wasn't a very friendly place for me to be in for a while, I used to go and hide in a cave across from my house. And I would literally send myself into my house to be with my parents and my siblings, and they would take care of that being that showed up. So you were very loose when we were adolescent.
Right.
It's children. Children are always stepping into the spiritual world. There's very little that really stands between the spiritual world and this world that we claim is a world of manifestation. It's basically and literally all vibration anyway. It's all vibration, qualities of vibration. But intrinsically, I knew as a child to survive and to do well that I had to put into practice certain things which then later I found out were mystical or in origin. The idea of having a double that you can place in a situation and then keep your safe distance. And these are things that I did as a child, and I didn't know until I was in my 20s that I was actually moving back and forth through this shadowy area between worlds, one world and the other. So it was happening from the time that I was born. I was born a 10-month baby, which is Buddha. I'm born on Buddha's birthday. Once we do the time zones, it's the exact same time.
Wow.
My oldest son is born on my birthday. We share the same birthday, exact same time.
Wow.
It's real fascinating. We're watching him unfold too,
Right.
because he obviously brings a spiritual destiny with him that's important to us to understand. And there's a guidance thing that's happening there. But I was a 10-month baby, 4 times induced, and would not come. And when I showed up, I had black hair, long black hair, black beard, wrinkled face, long mandarin fingernails, black hair all over me and everything.
Oh my
Because if you
gosh.
stay for a long time in the womb, you
That's
get that.
true.
So you get all hairy
Well,
and
not
everything.
the beard, though.
Right.
That's a little unusual.
Yeah, it was really, well, they said they had hair on my back and on
Yeah.
the chest and palms of the hands, really, really interesting. And at one point when I was working with the Waldorf school system with their esoteric branch, my mentor said to me, he asked me about my birth, and I told him about it, and he said, in any other culture, they would have whisked you off to the temple. I mean, they would have immediately put you into a particular place to be taught.
Right.
And in our culture, we're all being taught. We're all being initiated. We're all those types of people. There's a very clear sense for me that we're all spiritually destined to come here and to serve a particular unfolding of the spiritual manifestation. And so all of us are this. Some of us get hair on our hands and long mandarin fingernails so that we can't miss it, right? So was I called? Yeah, from the time I actually got here. I mean, I was actually conceived when they dropped the bomb on Hiroshima on August 15th. And I have actually experienced the shifting of souls, the people leaving and whatnot. And this tells me I have something to do. And every time I've wavered from my cause or wavered from the path, I've been brought back by circumstance, not always pleasant either.
Yeah, I can imagine. That's a pretty strong calling.
Yeah, it is a strong calling.
Now, it seems to me that there's not a whole lot of free will involved in your calling. You sort of have a very direct, no mess around, no kidding kind of path.
Well, that's taken a long time to get there. I mean, it's not as if I came understanding to follow the will of a higher power. We all, as Plato would say, we all have our daimons, you know, the guiding spirit, you know, and I'm very well acquainted with mine. And if you do not follow its promptings, then oftentimes you come to have afflictions in your life, which is something that you pay then attention to ask questions. Am I
Right.
doing the right thing or not? I can remember when I was going into the service when I was 18, and my mother had been a nurse. I had been around nurses and doctors. I didn't like it. I didn't want to have any part of it. And yet, when I went in the service, I was one of 500 young airmen, Air Force people, sitting there getting our first orders and to go off to our training stations, and they got through 500 people, and my name was last, of course, Zemke, and they said, you're going to be a medic. And I can remember jumping up, totally outside of the bounds of myself, yelling, no, 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 I'll do anything, but I won't do that. And they said, you have no choice in doing this, you see. Well, I did, of course. I could totally mess it up. That was a choice I had. But what occurred was that on the bus ride from Texas to Mississippi, where I was going to be trained, as I was getting on the bus after a lunch break, I heard a voice say, try. That's all it said, try. And I sat on the bus and I said, I will try. Well, it turns out I loved it. And I was very, very good at it. And I ended up charting my path for many years whenever I needed to be working, whenever I needed to renew myself. I would go back, and I was an emergency room technician and a psychiatric technician. Well, I loved the work. It's healing work. And then that took me into the realms of healing without even working with the physical aspect of it, too. And those questions of who was leading the show? You know, was it simply my willingness to accept that I wasn't leading the show? And that's part of what we do is, you see, in the Greek time of Plato, there was not even a word for individual.
Oh, I didn't know
People
that.
did not consider themselves persons separate from their faith. They were fated by the gods, yes. And it is only in the last 2,000 years, 2,500 years, that what we've done is we've developed an understanding of the individual. And one of the paths that we go through is becoming individuals is we become egocentric. We discover that we have a great magnetism for self-concern.
Right.
And that's what we're working with. And when we look at our culture right now, that's what we see we're doing. America is really doing it. We have less of a sense of tradition, so we're more in the present, and thus we look at ourselves as individuations, you know, really stressing, promoting our cause.
And not temporary.
Not
Our lifetimes seem huge, hugely long and
they
permanent.
do, but they're not.
Right.
No, they're very minute. That's something actually that women experience more than men. That's why in women's initiation rites and traditional cultures, you find that the women come to it naturally because biologically they're in the continuum, and the boys have to be taught about the continuum, which is one of the great areas where we lack in our culture is in adolescent transformation or rites of passage.
Right.
We don't bring our children into the mythical cosmos. We don't create cosmic citizens of them. So they do get small, and this is what we're doing right now, is we're doing predominantly egoism. And in that, people want to force their will upon the world. There's a place and a time when I think we come to recognize that there's a vastness to the world that's trying to live its life through us. I don't live my life. Life lives itself through me. My great challenge is to be non-resistant and to agree with this divine mind of the universe, this vast, huge intelligence. If anything that happens, whether it's photosynthesis or nuclear fission or how you digest your food or getting across the street, any of these things, there is a 1/2 second variable for this occurrence to happen, or the whole world would not exist.
Okay.
So in other words, the universe works on that kind of time frame. The big cosmic things, right down to the small things. There's a 1/2 second variable. If it happened a 1/2 second earlier, a 1/4 second earlier, a 1/4 second later, something different would have happened.
Okay.
See, this is, you know, like sort of quantum physics and astrophysics, and we look at some of the dynamics they share, and we say, well, one of them is timeliness.
Mm-hmm.
The universe is very orderly and very timely.
Right.
We may not like the consequences
Right.
of what we see around us, yet my sense is that because I am a unique lens
Mm-hmm.
for the universe, if I don't like what I'm seeing, it's probably because I'm not seeing it correctly or fully or vastly enough,
Mm-hmm.
which comes back to the idea of non-resistance.
Also, just the perception of liking and not liking and taking it so personally.
Yeah, don't take it personally. You know, there's a great aspect of I have just had an experience. Let's say I heard someone recently talk about getting on a bus, and someone also got on the bus from the other side, and they ran over and sat in the only available seat, so this person could not sit down there.
Right.
And so they went to they were on their way to their therapist, and they go to the therapist, and they said, I want to tell you, I'm really angry, I want to tell you the story. You know, this person got on the bus, and I got on the bus, and there was the one seat, and they sat down. Why did they do that to me? And the therapist, I believe was Thomas More or James Hillman, one or the other, said, actually, the occurrence occurred as it was supposed to unfold. The problem is the idea that you have that it was why me.
Mm-hmm.
See, that person did not get up that morning saying, I know there's a single seat on that bus later that
Right.
I'm going to run in so that Madge or Bobby Joe or whatever can't get in that seat. It's not personal.
Mm-hmm.
It is circumstantial. It is synchronistic. Nothing happens in our lives that we are not an active participant in.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea is, how do I want to view what's happening that I call my life?
Mm-hmm.
How do I want to move to it? How do I want to participate with it, which is an expansive attitude? It's an attitude of love.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm self-concerned, I become fearful. And I often then become, well, we can say that I can love my life well enough that I can be expansive also. That's a self-concern that's maybe beneficial.
Okay.
But if I'm concerned that I'm not going to get enough, if I'm concerned that there's a lack in the world, if that lack exists, then I'm always looking to put my armor on, or to put my shields around me, or to limit the size of my group. During Millennium, when we were beginning to ask this question, are we going to survive? Are we going to make it through? You know,
Right.
all of these sort of things. People were dropping back from membership in social groups. Why so? Well, because they're moving back to a more limited group of loyalty people that they can count on as having the same attitudes in the world as they have, so that they feel safe with them. So, see, it's like, let's say I'm a Baptist. You know, well, I'll go to my Baptist church because I speak the same language as they do.
Right.
You know, but I was also a member of the foreign wars. Well, maybe I can still handle staying with the foreign war guys because we speak a language that still feels safe and common to me. But I was also in the bowling league, and there were some guys in the bowling league on some of the other teams that were obviously not of my type. And so, you know, I cannot expand to meet them, so I'm going to contract a little bit to where I feel safe. We all want to be safe. I believe the only way for me to be safe is to not take it personally, to not be resistant to the divinity, to the organic and wondrous, totally wondrous intelligence of the universe. There's a guy, his name's Dominic Crowson. He's a Catholic priest who was one of the fellows who started the Jesus Seminar, which was they were going to look at the Bible, and they were going to, they've been doing this for years now. They just printed the first edition of it. And they looked through and they were trying to find out, and they actually created systems to determine which of the sayings of Jesus can they be absolutely sure he probably said this.
Okay.
He probably said this. Well, see. Okay. Anyway, he most probably said this,
Okay.
right? And then the ones that perhaps he did, perhaps he didn't. Then there are the ones that show that there's probably editing that, you know, we know there was editing in the Bible. You know, the editing that was involved in that probably he did not say this. This is someone else's idea. And he said that the one thing, the one statement, the one attitude that Christ of Jesus brought that he can be absolutely assured of, because it just sort of saturates all of the parables, all of the sayings, all the miracles, all the teachings, is ask and you will receive. In other words, how is it that you know, if I'm looking for a manual as to how to live a life that's full in the world and spiritually rich and in agreement with it, how do I have to ask? Well, how do I ask?
Yeah.
Asking is what I do. I
Okay.
acknowledge that the world is larger, more divine, more orderly than my personal small experience, and yet I also acknowledge that through my small experience, I'm making the image of the world that's affecting my reality. My reality is the reality I'm projecting on the world. So the next thing I ask is divine intelligence, and I don't care what you want to call God or divine mind or any image that you use. Your image that you use is the one that should be friendly to you, so that you feel comfortable using it.
What about people that plea and beg with an angry God?
Well, that's a whole other, isn't it interesting? God-fearing or God-loving? I mean, there in the book of John says, and God is love, right? See, so I picked that up. That's a singularity statement that I'm going to really propose is right. And what I recognize is that in looking past the last half century of my life is that the divine has been trying to love me all the time.
Okay.
That everything that's come to my life has been useful for me, even if it's an affliction, that it's turned out to be useful. As an example, when I was 21 years old, just got out of the service, sort of at a loss for what to do, went back to Michigan where I'd come from, started hanging with my old buddies. We were hot rod guys, fast car guys, right? So what do? You drink, you drive, you drink, you drive.
Glad you're
right?
still here.
Yes, absolutely, I am too. Well, it didn't take but a couple of months to have the first accident, and it was a real horrendous accident, and it was like, hitting a parked wrecker at an accident that already happened. And the outcome of it was that I fractured the orbit of my eye. Wow. Now, I'm an artist, so this is real important that I could still paint and draw and all things like this. So I fractured the orbit of my eye. 3 years later, when I'm in California, I go to a party on July 4th, which a part of me said, don't go, don't go, don't go, trouble's coming, and another part of me said, I'm really supposed to go even though there's trouble coming. So I went to this party, and a gentleman came out of this party and attacked me, and he hit me with a gun there at this eye, right? And several days later, when I went to see the doctor, it was great because I was like swollen from up in the hairline down to here. It was beautiful. It was
because of the orbital?
Yeah, he
Wow.
pistol whipped me. And the doctor said, if you had not had that extra calcium around your eye, you would have lost your eye.
From the original break?
That's right. So now, when I'm 21, having a car accident that I'm going, why is this happening to me? You see, the lady on the bus, why is this happening to me? 3 years later, it turns out that that's actually a saving grace. So who am I to claim that I know all the synchronistic wisdom of the divine mind to get me to where I'm going? Now, I know when I agree with it more, that I get better results.
And I want to talk more about, get back, because I took you off course here, about asking. Asking, ye shall receive.
Yes.
How do we ask?
How do we ask? I ask in the simplest way. I mean, when I was a kid, I was raised Methodist, and I came to a point of a sense of hypocrisy for the whole thing, so I lost my sense. I couldn't say God. I couldn't say it for years.
That's common.
Yeah, it is.
Really
it is, and I think it's useful for us to do that. Yeah, I think that teenagers and late adolescents, that they cannot take someone else's God system as their own. I think they have to find their own way of saying it. And blessed are the ones who have adults around them that say, look, if you need to call God Bob, do it. Whatever way you need to see God in your life, see God in your life that way, as long as you keep communicating. See, as long as you keep communicating. So I have gone through recovery of the use of the word God. I've come to the recovery of the understanding of what the Christ principle is, that saturates the universe. Thank you, Fellowship of the Holy Grail, for that. And even within the last couple of years, I've actually come to a greater realization of who this man Jesus was, who got to unfold the Christ, which is in every one of us, in his life, and then became a master teacher from it. So thank you, Jesus. I mean, so it works, right? It works on all levels.
Yeah.
Now, how do I ask? I ask non-specifically. Now, there's a book by Dr. Don't know his first name, but Dorsey is his name, and he's got a book compiled of 132 studies on the function of prayer, And what they've recognized is the most nonspecific prayer is the most effective prayer. In
Huh.
other words, you know, if Billy Bob comes to you and says, you know, I've got a toothache, you don't say, you know, and God says Billy Bob's not going to have a toothache. What you say is, you say, may this experience for Billy Bob be as full as possible.
Huh. Okay.
See, Billy Bob cannot be anywhere from the divine mind. You can't be distant from it. The word individual actually means indivisible.
Oh, how interesting. Okay.
Isn't it? Right. See,
Indivisible.
so what I'm saying is that I'm indivisible from the divine mind. In other words, am I in the likeness of the divine mind? Yeah, I am. I am. So are you. So is this. This is created in a way that it follows certain principles and laws to display an aspect of the divine mind, divine intelligence of the world in its form, right? We do too. Right? One of the things that I know, whether I'm a tree, whether it's a stream, whether it's a glacier, whether it's whatever, a human being, is that everything in the universe gathers information about its situation and then makes responses to that situation, and that's called transformation. Right? It makes a response that is transformative to the next moment, right? And so the tree is gathering information about humidity, about temperature, about the direction of the wind, about whether its limbs are getting heavier, does it put some more cells under here to hold it up? You know, the tree's making all this information gathering. Now, I know that as a human being, I have probably as adequate a tool for living as a tree does for being a tree.
Right.
And so what is it that I'm given? Well, I'm given an inquiring mind. See. So the idea is can I ask the universe, reveal to me so that I cannot mistake what I'm seeking here? Whatever you're seeking with me and whatever I'm seeking with you, can you reveal it to me? It has to be a willingness on my part to surrender the outcome.
Okay.
Right. That's, see, my task is to strive consistently to ask of the universe what is most harmonious right now. And then the other thing is to surrender what the result's going to look like.
My question about this, though, for instance, about, I don't know if it was Tommy's tooth, what if his fullest experience is that it becomes gangrenous and he has to be in the hospital and go through a 6-month thing?
Absolutely.
But what does the prayer have to do with it? Wouldn't that have happened anyway?
Yes.
Okay.
Because the prayer's not for Tommy, it's for me.
What does it do for you?
Well, hopefully it reminds me to stay out of the way and let Tommy have Tommy's experience with the divine mind.
Ah.
See, because what happens is that, well, it's like this. When we worry about something, we're praying for the very thing we don't want to happen.
Okay, put that into an example for me.
Let's say I decide that I don't want to have my car stolen.
Okay.
Right. So I go around worrying about my car being stolen all the time, all the time, all the time, right?
Okay.
And what's happening is I'm attracting this car-stealing energy to me. I mean, we know that the world is a mental process. That's the great truth, right? Go to any of our great religions and go behind them to where they came from, and you come to what is called perennial philosophy. Aldous Huxley wrote a beautiful book called Perennial Philosophy. But what it is it's Madame Blavatsky called it, the wisdom religion. You know,
Okay.
it's the sense that there are some real consistent laws in the universe, and one is that the universe is mental. It's a mental process.
Right, and
It's
the Buddhists
it's a
definitely
great
use that.
thought. Right, that's right. It's a great thought. And what happens is that what we worry about, we attract into our lives. I mean, if you're worrying about not having money all the time, guess what? You'll have every opportunity to not have money. I mean, it's a really interesting phenomenon. What happens when you affirm that there's plenty in the world? The plenty comes to you. I mean, it sounds Pollyannish, but it's not, because the universe works that way. It works. One of the things that I got to come to with recognizing how the universe works is that I recognize the universe is sincere. There's nothing that ever happens in the universe that's not sincere. And if the universe is sincere, then that means that I must be sincere in my askings, and in my appreciations, and in my quandary about the great mystery. And the more that I'm sincere, the more that the results come that to me seem harmonious to what my life is about.
The surrender seems a big part of this. I'm just going to give a quasi-example. Most people have found themselves in this situation. They have to, let's say, their son is 18-hour drive away and they're about to go into surgery and you want to be there now. God, please send me a plane ticket. The plane ticket doesn't come, and there's just grief beyond belief. Nice little rhyme there. So how do you get beyond that self-centeredness, I guess you could call it?
Right.
And how do you make the plane ticket arrive? I mean, or are you just supposed to like let it go, the surrender?
There may not be a plane ticket that's supposed to arrive for you.
Because this is often what prayers have to do with.
Right. Well, that comes from the idea that there are various kinds of prayer work. You know, there's intercessional prayer. You know, I'm going to pray for you. There's petitional prayer. I'm going to pray for what I want. You know, then there's contemplative prayer, which I want to know how the whole thing works. Okay. Right. These are different kinds.
I have a feeling you've done
prayer.
that one a lot.
Sure. Yeah. We've done these. We've done all of these prayers. Well, actually, you know, when I was 11 years old, one day I was at a softball game and I was sitting there at the bench and we were one run behind and I started praying really hard for, you know, one run at least, if not a couple, you know, and all of a sudden I went, wait a minute, this is the wrong kind of prayer. You know, God to me was I was still in a quandary about what God was doing, and still am. And my idea was, well, gosh, you know, God has more important things to do than messing with my softball game here. Anyway, I stopped praying for years because I recognized I didn't want to pray selfishly in a certain sense. And what we have found, again, I'll refer to Dr. Dorsey's lovely book, is that when you pray for things to have right outcome, that miracles happen. Now, see, the right outcome may not be for me to get on the airplane. You know, here's an example. This sort of comes from a Chinese proverb. You know, Johnny's sick in the hospital, so I pray for the plane ticket. So, you know, Betty Jo gives me the plane ticket, so I get on the plane, it crashes, and I die, and that makes the son who's sick heartbroken, and they pass. I mean, you know, you can make up all kinds of, it's the thing of, it's the Chinese proverb goes something like this. There was a man who had a farm, and he had a son, and someone gave him a horse, and his neighbor said, "My, that was very fortunate. Someone gave you a horse." And he said, "Well, yes, it was very fortunate, but my son fell off the horse and broke his leg." And the neighbor goes, "Oh, that's very bad." He said, "Well, yes, it was bad because he broke his leg, but it was really good because the army of the emperor came through conscripting young men into the army, and they couldn't take my son because he had a broken leg." See, so the idea is, what is good and what is bad? Right. You know, what are the consequences? You know, getting my face fractured at 21 ended up saving my eye at 24. Now, you see, if I had petitioned to not have the occurrence happen at 21, or if I had felt that was some sort of slight by God, why did you make me suffer, God? You know, this sort of thing. You know, then I wouldn't have gotten the other aspect of it also. When we pray that the good things happen, that the greatest good occurs, then we leave it open for the universe to get involved. Oftentimes when we're petitioning simply from our limited point of view, what we do is really limit the miracles that can happen in our lives.
Yeah, and I've noticed miracles are so much more creative and spontaneous and magical than I could have imagined.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, isn't it amazing?
Yeah.
Isn't it amazing? We just have no idea how profound the universe is and how willing it is to give us its good. You see, it's always up to us whether we're limited in our willingness to accept the good. You know, it's so funny because you go back, you know, Jesus was, the way it's been recorded, he was a pretty interesting teacher, right? He said some really direct things. As a matter of fact, after we look at the 30 or so Gospels that got edited out, you know, and the 4 that were kept, we go, it's a wonder they left some of the stuff in there that they left,
It is.
you know, because he's saying things like, you know, the kingdom is at hand. Whoa, you can have anything you want, you know. Can you live in non-resistance to this divine activity of life that's trying to give you all this good? You will do greater things than I will. You know, I mean, think about that. You know, here's a person who ascribed to him as being a miracle person, a miracle worker, a healer, a raiser of the dead, all of this, you know, and then we say, and you will do greater things than that. You know, well, and this is quite an open invitation, isn't it, to accept a gift. And to my mind, there have been very few people that I have read about through history that have accepted that gift.
Hmm. That's true.
Yeah, so we're still waiting, in a sense. You know, I think we're still waiting to unfold all that that gift means.
Do you think, talking to you as the minister, do you think Jesus had a clue about what he was in for?
No, I think there was a turning point. I'm glad you asked. I have my pet theories here. You know, I love to stretch into this. When Jesus, okay, here Jesus is coming along, right? And yes, he is in the correct line, the correct lineage. Joseph and Mary were both of the right families to produce a messianic heir.
All right.
Right, and this was an old story, you know, about when the Messiah would come. Well, so was Elizabeth and oh, gee whiz, what was John the Baptist's parents? They were in the right line to create a messianic heir also. And John was supposed to be the priest heir, and Jesus was to be the king heir, the heir of David, right? So you had two aspects. You had the priest and you had the king. Now, nowhere in the prophecies did it say that they could be both the same guy.
Okay.
Okay, and so what happened was they're coming along, and according to now what we know more and more from the Dead Sea Scrolls and Nag Hammadi library, you know, the Coptic scrolls, you know, what we know more and more about what was happening in first century, you know, Jerusalem, Judea, Galilee, we understand there was a lot of political upheaval, that there were these high, unorthodox subgroups of mystics that Jesus was somewhat involved with, you know, if not really involved with, and that they were trying to create a situation in which the prophecies of old could be fulfilled. That's what they were trying to create a messianic situation to do this.
Okay.
And Jesus was a willing participant, and I'm sure he believed it on a great level. Then something happens, and what happens, John the Baptist gets his head cut off, right? And suddenly, that part of the puzzle's gone. Now, what do? You're not going to create another Messiah figure in the priest line to take his place. I mean, I suppose that could have happened, but there wasn't anybody waiting in the wings, right? Jesus decided to do something. He decided to take on both roles.
Ah,
See,
okay.
and when he did, he broke everybody's rules. He broke the Essenes' rules, he broke the Pharisees' rules, he broke the Sadducees' rules, he broke everybody's rules. And that's why they basically got really ticked off at him. Everybody got mad at Jesus for doing this, right? But when this happened, so John the Baptist is gone. Jesus is in a quandary. Oops, politically, this isn't going to work, right? One part of the puzzle's missing. And so he goes up to Tyre Sidon, which is sort of a resort town in Syria, just above Galilee. And he goes out there and he's hanging out, he's meditating. So he wants to do a retreat and sort of figure out what's happening. So he goes to someone's house. It's a very nice Jewish house. In the Bible, it's called the Canaanite woman, or the Syro-Phoenician woman is how the story's labeled. So he goes there, and he's sitting there, and he's going, geez, you know, what am I going to do? You know, and he finishes dinner, and he says, well, I'm going to retire to a room and read some scrolls and wash my feet and think about this, you know. As he gets up to leave, and everybody else is gone, this woman comes in. She's a Syro-Phoenician woman, which means that she is she's born Phoenician, she lives in Syria, and she's probably Greek Hellenized, because that was her big Greek area. We remember that Alexander the Great and his boys had been down there for 300 years, so they had Hellenized. That's a whole interesting part of the story.
And most people spoke Greek at that time.
A lot of people spoke Greek. Jesus spoke Aramaic. He spoke some Hebrew, but Hebrew was more of a holy language. The common everyday language was Aramaic. Okay. So Jesus is getting up and he's going to go. See, he's got a lot on his mind. And this woman comes in and she goes, son of David. She names him. She names him as the person in this line. Now, we also know that David had to make alliances with these folks earlier when he was messing around with Saul. This is years earlier, right? Okay. But anyway, so she says, you know, thy son of David. And he goes, oops, no one's called me that, you know. And she said, I have a daughter who's beset by demons. Will you do something about it? Now, her daughter was developmentally disabled. That was a common term for people who were developmentally disabled. They had demons, right? So
seizures, something
like
that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, maybe she's epileptic. You know, maybe she's Down syndrome. You know, maybe she's autistic. You know, she could be anything, right? And she says, now, one of the things that I've worked with kids with disabilities, special needs kids, for 25 years, and the thing that they are is sincere. And anybody
Yeah.
that works with them for a long period of time sort of cuts through all of the goofy stuff and gets very sincere. So this woman is not about to mince words with him. And she says, will you take care of my daughter? And he goes, you know, I only came here to save the children of Israel, and you're not one of them.
Really?
Yes, Jesus was being very gauche. He was being a cad. And that's what he did. That's what he said. He said, no, I'm only working for this group of people. See, because that was the prophecy. See, the children of Israel were the chosen people. When they accomplished a certain task, then they would get to be the example for everyone in the world. That's what their prophecy said. And they would call God into the situation to make everybody spiritually perfect. And so what Jesus said is, no, I work for the Israelites, don't work for you. He said, then he says something really gross. He says, you know, why should I give the good food to the dogs?
Oh my goodness.
Yes. And she says to him, sir, thy son of David, reminding him again. He says, look buddy. And you can almost see her in his face, right? You know, she says, even the food that falls unnoticed from your lips feeds the dogs under the table. And in that moment, he is called to his task. And in that moment, he recognizes that he is here for everyone, not specifically for those that it's politically expedient to be there for. His whole understanding of life changes from being personality to principle, from being an inclusive only of a certain group of people to inclusive of everyone. And what he says is, you know, your daughter's already okay. I just checked it out. You know? See, so isn't it profound, for one thing, that it's someone who comes with that sincerity built from affliction and disability that calls him to task? Because you know, you know, she didn't have anything to lose. You know, it's the only argument he loses in the Bible.
Ah, how interesting! And to a woman.
To a woman.
I'm surprised they let that get through too.
Of almost all the miracles in the Bible, they're all at the behest of women. Mary and Martha come, raise Lazarus from the dead. His mom, can you make water into wine? The woman who bleeds and touches him, you know, you're healed by your very presence. Time and time and time again, it's the women who come. You know, the ministry, the first century ministry, there were more women leaders than men ministers in the early church.
Oh, I didn't realize that at all.
Yes, absolutely.
We're going to take a short break right here, and
Okay.
we're going to get back to more of the male-female dynamic. We'll go in a little bit different direction.
Okay.
So please stay with us. This is a fascinating conversation. I hope you're enjoying it. Thank you for staying with us, and I want to thank Rainbow Zen for my beautiful outfit this evening. They're at 113 West Main Street. And for anyone who would like to contact Philip or anyone at the station, you can call, or I'm sorry, anyone at the show, the number is 829-9162, or for MCAT 542-6228. And actually, I should also have you give out your phone number if you'd like to take calls or questions. What's your phone number?
My phone number is 543-2704.
2704.
2704.
And do you have an email or anything else?
Not right now.
Okay.
No,
You're plugged in but not zapped in yet.
it's coming.
Now, I wanted to get back to what we were talking about a little bit, and using one of my favorite examples, some Native American groups, they'll have, and this is very historical, you know, there are all sorts of things going on now, but the women would have the dreams, they'd share it with the tribe or the tribal elders, and the men would help manifest the direction they perceived from the dreams. So there's that intuitive and the action side.
Mm-hmm.
It seems very much a corollary to what you were saying about Jesus getting the message for his new role from the Phoenician, what's the full?
Yes, the Syro-Phoenician woman.
Syro-Phoenician woman.
Yeah.
And all these women helping him manifest all the miracles that are the basis of the faith and belief in Jesus.
Yes. Well, women were easily disposed of, easily brought down low in the culture, in the Jewish culture at that time.
Okay.
And they lived a pretty fragile life as to whether they were in favor or out of favor, and in status or losing status. And
makes me want to catch my breath just thinking about it.
Yeah, I know. Sometimes when I walk down the streets of Missoula and I think of all of the homeless people I see, the proportion of homeless women to homeless men in Jesus' time in the towns that he would be involved in, it would have been probably 3 to 1.
Whoa.
So 3 out of 4 every, it was a read the lovely story of Naomi and Ruth, when Naomi she leaves Israel and goes to Moab, thinking life will be better there, and then her husband and her sons die there of a disease, and she has to move back to Israel, and she's a widow, and she's like got nothing. She still has to obey all the kinship rules and everything, but she basically has zilch, and very few rights. The only right she has is to the leftover pickings in the fields and things like that. So when Jesus goes through a ministry of those people who are dispossessed or are exiled, that he finds that most of them are women, and he takes them in, and his ministry is very feminist oriented. We think of Paul as a fairly misogynist sort of person, the letters of Paul and whatnot. Right. They're all situational. They're all those letters, whether it's from the Galatians or whether it's from the Thessalonians or whoever it is. These are all different towns. The Ephesians, these towns had Greek temples in them, and in every town that he went to, like if he went to Ephesus and he said, well, they're Dionysius worshippers here. Okay. And that means that part of the worship is the women let their hair down and take the clothes off and come out and dance and revel in the nude in the streets. He says, now we're getting converts from that temple into our quasi-Christian, pre-Christian communities, right. But we need to have some distinction between them and us. Yet we cannot also offend them, because they're the dominant social organization, the dominant spiritual organization in that town. That's true of all the letters of Paul. He's writing, that's why in one town he's telling them, loosen up a little bit. In Galatia, get your women to loosen up a little bit. And over in Ephesus, he's going, tone it down a little bit, tone it down a little bit. See, so he's making very situational specific recommendations. The fact that it got dogmatized, it was never his intent, right? So, but the idea is that he talks to the women, and he honors the women who are the head, the Lydias and the other women who are head of churches, and the churches are in the homes, and we know that. Great story. Recently, the Pope was walking somewhere, right? And the Pope's walking down the street, and apparently someone was asking him questions, but there was a reporter present also, and this person asked the question. He said something to the Pope about, well, Mary Magdalene. And the Pope says, thinking, I believe that he was in strict confidence, he said, now there's the apostle of the apostles.
Oh, wow.
Right, see. Now, this is not a Catholic position,
no.
More or less.
No.
It's not a straight position, but it's this Pope's personal opinion.
This is the present-day Pope.
The present-day Pope.
Oh, okay.
That Mary Magdalene was now see, and he's been reading, I'm sure, the excise texts,
right.
For a lot longer than I have. But in those, there's a lot about the women's role amongst the disciples, in particular Mary. I mean, Mary Magdalene was apparently more astute than the other disciples, and was actually used as an intermediary for bringing Jesus' teaching to the other disciples, and a lot of them didn't like it. Especially Peter didn't like it. Back to the question of Paul. Recently there's a woman, her last name is Prather, and she wrote a book called The Hidden Voices, and I'm sending it out to ministers all over the place. I'm loving this book. She is a linguist. She was a fundamentalist, but she was a linguist, and in retranslating Paul's letters, she's recognized the situational dynamics of it even more so, and has now gone into studying all of the temples that were in these towns to find out why he was giving specifics the way he was, and recognizes that Paul's actually a feminist like Jesus, because what Paul did was he set up schools in every one of the towns. There's a place where it said, you know, Mary asked Jesus, when will I be of equal status? And he says, when you're like a male. And that has been used dogmatically to say, well, that means that women are inferior. Not
Right.
so. What it means is when you are literate, because she's a Jewish woman, the Jewish women were not allowed to read, the Jewish men were. So the Jewish men had scriptural access, the Jewish women didn't. If the Jewish women were going to teach in this new religion, then they had to be literate.
Right.
So Paul set up schools in every town that he went to.
To teach the women.
To teach the women.
Ah, okay.
See, so that they could have equal access and equal empowerment.
And he
in the
wouldn't have done
community.
that if he thought they were inferior.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. No. So we're redeeming Paul. Yay. Which is wonderful. You know, Mary Magdalene is a wonderful, you know, personality in the Bible to redeem, as is Paul. You know, because they've been, and I'm historically, you know, I can't go back to the 4th century and say, why did this bishop or why did this cardinal choose to interpret the Bible a certain way and say, well, we're only going to talk about it in this way. You know, there was a historical precedent, a historical situation that I may not be privy to. And so I'm not going to claim that it's that it was bad politics back then. But I do say right now that if we as a species want to survive very well, how can we underestimate the power of half of our species?
That's well put.
How could we? Yeah. Yeah, it seems rather ridiculous and highly arrogant to do such a thing. It's an amazing. So Unity Church is really interesting. It has more women ministers than any other denomination in the
Oh,
United
that's nice
States.
to know.
Yeah, it is. It is. Yeah.
I want to get back to the hard path. So Jesus had one of the harder paths we know of. And again, he may not have known what he was in for. Even when he made that choice to be more inclusive, that didn't mean he knew.
Oh, I think he recognized that that meant the end of the easy way for him, if there was an easy way at all before then. Yeah, I think he knew he was stepping out. He was stretching, and that it was going to mean, I mean, he was only 2 weeks away from riding into Jerusalem. I mean, he was 3 weeks away from crucifixion, and he knew by stating it, the way he was going to state it, that he was going to call down everything on him.
Just as a today sort of look at that. So for instance, you, when you got in that fight, or not the fight, but the man hit you, you knew ahead of time that you should do that, you should go there, although it wasn't going to be an easy place to be.
That's right.
But you went anyway. You had the courage to go with it. And one of the, I think it's sort of comical things about spirituality is you'll have this really rough path. You're not on your path, and you'll get afflictions.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, the guides, the God, whatever, opens up to you and says, come this way. And they show you the ease that's available. And to me, the comical part is, you know, they bring you back on your path. You see the ease. You see the help you get, the encouragement you get, the courage that you all of a sudden have that you didn't know you had to be on that path. But then this path can end up being much harder than being off the path in the long run. And I'm just putting a whole bunch of ideas out here. When you're choosing your career, you know, you can go with your voice, and your you voice might say, but there's no money in that. I'm not going to, you know, 40 years of it. I can't imagine doing that for 40 years.
Right.
I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. And people say this when they get married. The same woman, the same man, 40 years, 50 years. That's impossible. I can't imagine doing that. I can't do that.
Right.
And I just want you to talk to me about the whole thing of making these choices, making these life paths, and having courage. Okay.
Okay.
I went all over the place.
Sure, that's fine. That's fine. Let us suppose that when we're gathering ourselves up for a life, and we have, on the one hand, that wonderful, eternal, non-alterable thing called the seed germ of our spirit, which is an individuated part of spirit, which comes and says, oh, let's have a life. Let's have another life. It's my time to come, as you say, for a very short period of time through this zone again, right? We're coming through this earth zone. And so we say, well, what do I need to do an earthly life? Well, one of the things that I need is soul, right? I need to know all of these qualities of life, you know, the soul of sorrow, the soul of joy, the soul of participation, the soul of boundary, the soul of transformation. All of these things we call the qualities of life, right? We recognize that this is the Greek gods. Hermes is the god of transformation. Hestia, his counterpart, is the hearth mother who keeps things the same, so that you see there's a balance. You see, the Greek gods are a great place to go and look at all of the teams, because they're going to tell you about the complementary qualities of the soul. Right? So we get the soul, right? And we collect the soul, and we have soul groups. We have people that are going to work with us in our soul activity. Then we collect the life force body from what we call the etheric field. Yeah, and then we make a physical body out of that, and now here we go. And I think we choose our parents and where we're going to be and all of this. Now, why would we choose the things that we choose? We choose them because we're actually involved in the transformation of the soul of the world. We are, if there's anything that there is in this world, it is an intentionality to experience. I think that's the ancient old Gnostic guys. They had this wonderful way of saying, what was God's first activity, going from passive, you know, when there's nothing, to active, and we're still in the active thing. We've been doing it for, what, 15 billion years. The activity is the will to will.
The will to will.
The will to will.
Okay.
The will to will. The intent to experience. Right? See, the whole thing is about the intent to experience. And I don't believe that there's any indication that the universe is self-injurious. So I can assume that anything that happens, including getting hit in the eye, has a meaning which is well beyond the personal why me. You know, that it's about something that's ongoing. It's a process, and that ultimately it's not hurtful to me. You know, a person making their transition because they're passing from this realm to the next realm through the thing we term cancer, that's really non-injurious to the universe, is it?
Right.
No, it's not. Right? Nothing can be injurious to the universe. I start with that premise. Right? Well, so here I'm coming in, and I'm bringing an intention with me to do a certain soul function, and I have certain parts of soul which are very developed. Let us say I developed courage. I'm bringing a lot of courage. See, actually, I didn't bring courage, I brought curiosity with me.
Okay.
See, that's my daemon is Hermes, who says seek and discover. You see,
And this is for you personally?
Personally, yes. Curiosity has carried me through the world, and times when I would have been taking a path that would have become sedentary and non-challenging. I was never allowed to do that. I was always, curiosity always caused me to break barriers and come through to a new, continuing to explore life. Also very fear-ridden. I had a lot of fear in my life, and the idea is that my curiosity was always leading me into transformative experiences where I said, well, that wasn't as fearful as I thought it was going to be. You see, whether it's marriage, well, there can be a lot of fear around marriage, you know, or child raising. You know, I was in my 30s before I started having children because I was afraid that I wouldn't be a good father. You see, you know, but the curiosity, you know, and the clarity of the soul need of the universe keeps drawing you into situations where eventually you say yes to them, right? So what I think is that we come in with certain soul qualities that are very mature. These are our good, solid tools. And certain things that are unmature, these are the things we're doing for the universe. So I've actually been able to play with fear all my life because this is a time when fear has to be examined because it's become the primary mythology of our time. And one of my teachers, when I was down doing my studies with Unity, with the Unity Church, I said to him, you know, look at this, I'm characterized by fear and the overcoming of it, and this is probably very useful to the people I come involved with. And he said, well, of course, why do you think you would have come in with this predilection for fear if it wasn't that you were going to help other people through it too? It's the wounded healer idea. See, you only can heal what you've already experienced, genuinely, authentically, and fully. So when we look at afflictions in our lives, they are not about, oh, why me? They are, oh, what tool am I now building for the soul of the world that I'm going to be useful for? I mean, midwives, they only work when they've had their own children. When they're there going through that situation with a woman giving birth, I've caught my children. I've been involved in midwifery, and what a powerful experience this is, you know. And yet, you know, I can go back and tell you when I was born through pain in my own life, when I was in areas where the suffering seemed endless, right? And you could only ride it. You could only get on the stream and ride it out. Right. Now, this is a great mystical truth, because the mystic, when he goes through initiation, is literally, that's the first thing he has to do, is become non-resistant to time. He has to let go of time and become eternal and say, there is no time. Now I can ride this thing no matter what it is until it's done. And that's childbirth. You see, we're actually born. To be born into this world here, we had to die to the level of consciousness, pre-body consciousness. And now when we're done here, we will leave the body and be born into another state of non-body consciousness. You know, we just keep being born and born and born and born and born, which is what I think the will to will is. It's the intent of the entire process of existence, is to continue to be born anew.
So why do we have such a fear of death?
So why do we have such a fear of death? That's a very interesting thing. In the West, we have a lot more fear of death than in other cultures. And actually, this is real interesting, because there's Dr. Rudolf Steiner, the great anthroposophist, founder of Waldorf education and whatnot. I studied with the Waldorf folks in their institutes and got to work on the inner esoteric level with the therapeutic branch. Very wonderful people. And one of the things that Dr. Steiner talks about is, why did this Jesus of Nazareth person, when he had unfolded the Christ, which is the eternal, total sense of consciousness of the indivisibility of the universe, right? You know you are one with the universe. That he had this experience, held it longer than anybody else that we know of. I mean, this is one of the ways why we look at this as a marking point in the history of the world, is that a person actually unfolded it like a flower in them and could maintain it over a long period of time. Now, one of the things that he says is what Jesus was about, the message he received, was that the Greeks at that time and the other people in the world had become so sense-oriented that they thought that the world ended when their senses stopped. Right. See, prior, when you go back to Paleolithic time, you see that people are what is called atavistically clairvoyant. You know, when you look at the cave paintings in France, when you look at what the Aborigines, how they make pictures and whatnot, you see that they're all auric, and they're talking about spirit lines moving in and out of the body. This is because they could see spirit, and things, what they saw with their eyes was not what we normally see as very defined outlines. So they were seeing energy fields. Okay, and the more that we use senses, the more that we evolve senses, the eyes, the ears, and the touch and whatnot, the more we begin to think that reality was only sensory based. We're really in that right now. We have a lot of people right now who don't think that they extend beyond their skin, and who don't think that anything exists unless they can see it and define it through the five senses. Right? And that what happened was that when people were leaving the planet, you know, they'd go through their life experience because they believed that when their senses ended, that they were literally scattering their soul function and scattering their spiritual function upon death because they were believing that death existed. In other words, human beings imagined death, as we know death, as disillusionment, as disintegration, as never again. That this form of idea of death was actually thought up in the imagination of human beings. But the imagination of human beings as co-creators in the universe mean that you can actually then make that possible. And so what was happening was that people were scattering and shattering upon death, and that what was happening was that fewer and fewer people were available to reincarnate. So the end of the human race was at hand.
And what time period are we talking about for this?
We're talking about 0 AD. We're talking about that time. So the whole idea, the mythical story that we get is that Jesus, who actually went beyond just the messianic Jewish story, and he took up the story of the Adonai. Now, the Adonai is an ancient Syrian Persian story about the vegetative God that dies and then is reborn. In other words, it's about cycles of regeneration, which the Jewish people did not have in their story. And Jesus actually becomes the Adonai after his Syro-Phoenician idea.
All right.
You see, he shifts and he comes, and as a matter of fact, a week later, he's standing at a spring in Caesarea Philippi, and it's a spring to Pan. And Pan is the vegetative god of the Greeks, right? And over this spring still exists today, it says, eternal child of God. And so he goes, he's standing there taking a drink, see, and he's going, Peter, hey, Peter, what does that say up there? Who do you think that, and he says, Peter, who do they say I am? And Peter goes, oh, geez, that's the boss is asking me this hard question. You know, I can't answer it. And one of the other disciples says, well, you know, they say you're Elisha, you know, and then someone says, well, they say you're the prophet. See, that's the easy answer, right? Well, it's the prophet, right? You know, and, you know, mouthpiece of God, you know. And then someone else says, well, they say you're John the Baptist. See, now they're getting close because John the Baptist has only been dead 2 weeks. Okay. Why would someone say that? You're the incarnation of John the Baptist who just died 2 weeks ago. See, we've got a clue now. We're stepping outside of time.
Right.
And Jesus says, Peter, who do you say I am? And Peter looks at this saying. It says, eternal child of God. And he says, you're the eternal child of God. In other words, you are in eternality. You do not die even when you die. You just change forms, and then you rebirth in a different form. You're transformational. You're a transfigured being. And Jesus goes, that's right. That's exactly who I am. He had to have Peter recognize it. So he says, Peter, you recognize it, so you get into heaven. That's what he says, you know. That's what they say, he says. But anyway, but what he said was, see, Jesus was having a hard time believing this himself, that he was about to embark on the Christed individuality, that he was going to know it all. And yet that's when it happened. That's when it happened. That happened on their walk back from the Syro-Phoenician woman. See, it's really compacted. See, he's getting this message. Wait a minute, mine's a universal message, a global message. And then he comes and he finds out it's a universal message. And he goes, oh my gosh, well, I better include those regenerative pictures of God here too. And that's why he knows he's got to go get crucified so that he can regenerate in front of people to prove that that is true. You see, and what he does when he says that is, guess what? You do not die when you think you die. Just because you lay this body down, you do not cease to have an existence in the universe. And he had to do that. He had to break the spell of the imagination of death.
What was happening when all these souls were exploding on death, fragmenting on death?
Yes, shattering and scattering.
Was the etheric side creating more new souls for us, or were they mending the old ones?
No, the etheric I don't think creates. The etheric's an empowering form, and it's like the substance that gets it, that takes its. Well, it's like you are magnesium, potassium, carbon, water, a lot of water, right? 72%. Why do you keep looking the same? Well, it's because you have an etheric model. Right. That keeps taking all of these minerals and waters and putting them through a type of transfiguration so that they can say, ah, it's Heidi again, see? You know, and if you look at a picture of you 7 years ago, we still recognize you as Heidi, even though every cell, every physical part of you has gone through transfiguration. You know, the cells have gone out and new cells have come in, new waters in. None of the water that you were 7 years ago is here now, right? Right, yet you remain the same. That's the etheric signature. What was happening with the soul function? What was happening was that the soul, which goes through this progression of building strengths so that it can do the work for the transformation of the soul of the world, can take up things that are unfinished and finish them. These are, what was happening was that these units of being, these spiritual beings, were going back to the primal spiritual thing, as if they'd had no experiences. See, so now you're like, it's like starting over. You lose any kind of accumulative effect of experience over time. So when Jesus said time is stopping, he really meant it. He meant time's going to stop because there'll be no more accumulative effect of creation, and literally there will be no more humans. Will have, you know, they might be returning, or there might be more and more generations of very, how should we say, instinctive human beings, but no intuition, no intellect, no inspiration, no channels in which spirit could talk to them.
I have one more personal question. We have about 5 minutes left, but you may have a story to go with this. You have a very keen, wonderful intellect, and I'm wondering, you probably have a lot to teach people about how to listen to the intuition and not rely strictly on the intellect.
Mm-hmm.
How do you do that?
There are, well, I've always had a chatty mind.
Okay.
Yeah, and there was a point in my relationship with the way I thought that when I was young, I had to think about everything I was thinking about.
Okay.
See, so I was always doing check-ins, right? You know, oh, I thought that thought. Was that a good thought? Was that not a good thought? Well, what happened was that as I accumulated more and more experiences, was that my mind became so racy that I couldn't keep up with it anymore. And so there was a time when I had to surrender to the fact that I wasn't going to know the way I thought I was going to know. In other words, I was not going to simply accumulate knowledge to some sort of 100% filled the vessel up, now I know it all,
Right.
sort of thing, right? I love curiosity, and when I recognized that I was no longer going to learn in the way I thought I was learning, you know, to some sort of conclusion, and the intellect wants conclusion, and we want it in our relationships. I just want that perfect relationship, then I'll never have to do anything again, you know, or, you know, just give me that degree, and I'll never have to do anything again, you know. The intellect loves conclusions because it's set up for them. You know, if you add these numbers together, an answer pops up, right? So that's the intellect, and that's fine. So what happened was the intellect gave way to a different kind of knowing. I say that what happened was that I was recognized as an artistic person very young and was given full opportunity to do art. When you do art, you're doing whole-brained activities.
Whole brain.
Whole brain, yeah. See, we're like this. Our subconscious runs at about 86% and is doing this all the time. Our intellect is only 6%. Right? We almost totally forget to use the right brain, which is full of intuitional patterning and whatnot. Well, when we're doing art, the moment that we stop being self-concerned or self-aware and become part of the process, we're at 100% of our neuroactivity is now talking to itself. So it was through art that I was allowed to survive and to grow and to learn more and more how to surrender to the moment, so that I still have my intellect, and yet I have a very developed intuition for life, and it comes through, you know, if music's what turns you on, use music, because it'll take you into that whole brain place. Meditation will take you into the whole brain place. But art actually functions to create the place where your soul can talk to you and tell you its story through images. That's why I do art with kids with disabilities. I do art with folks over at the state prisons. I do, well, not the prisons, with the, at Boulder, where they've got folks locked up. And what a powerful thing it is when people are allowed to make images of their soul conversation with the world.
Oh, that sounds very powerful.
Very powerful. So art, art, art. And it doesn't mean being an artist. It means being willing to have communion with your soul.
Thank you so much for being with us today, Philip. And if anybody is the least bit interested in their car works, or you know how to get on the bus, go to Bozeman, check out Philip at the Unity Church there Sundays.
Yes.
And why don't you give out your phone number once again?
Okay, my phone number is 543-2704.
543-2704.
Yes.
Thank you very much for being here with us. If you'd like to contact anyone on the show, any of the crew, 829-9162. Thank you, MCAT, 542-6228. And thank you, Rainbow's End, and have a wonderful, wonderful week.